EC 305 to appoint the appointment of Jessica Hernandez to the position of city attorney. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that passes unanimously. So now you can do that.
Thank you very much. I don't work for any of you. I don't work for you either. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity. I'm very excited to bring what I've done up until now to the city, and I really look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. President,
Yes,
I was thinking about what Councilor Lewis said about where does the city attorney sit? And that's an interesting question because the city attorney always used to sit with the administration, and someone pointed out that with an independent city attorney, it doesn't look good anymore. But now I don't have a separate place. So I'd like the city council and Rob to get together maybe over the next couple of weeks. And I mean, maybe we keep the city attorney in the gallery, or maybe we find another place for that. Has that independence that she can participate, because it is a position that actually is, I think, kind of part of what we do.
Well, Councilor Winter suggested maybe a robe right here in the middle.
Right in the middle.
We'll figure that out. I think you're right, Councilor Harris, that we do want to move away from that perception. So thank you. We now are on EC 257, and that's the mayor's recommendation of award to the superlative group to provide revenue-generating corporate sponsorship in Marshall Public Management Resources Incorporated. I move that. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any questions or concerns? Councilor Benton?
Yes, I realized that this was as a result of the discussions with the DOJ, and that actually included the fees that were to be paid. Is that correct, Mr. Perry?
Mr. President, Councilor Benton, that is correct.
And this is a 4-year contract that we would be approving. I guess it's like a contract, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear this.
Isn't this like a contract approval?
It is like a contract approval. For all intent and purposes. This is obviously a 4-year deal. As we had briefed council on previously, it involves the first 2 years at a certain number of hours and expertise devoted to it, and the second 2 years being what are called out years. It reduces down to about 50% of the time required. And the reason why is that the first 2 years is the heavy implementation and systems development and implementation throughout the settlement agreement period. And so the proposal that was put forth, and it was interesting because it was important in evaluating the monitor. Mr. Ginger had probably one of the best economic packages and offers, recognizing that the workload should tail off with the successful implementation and execution of the settlement agreement. So you're looking at 4 years, it's basically 1.4 per year for the first 2 years, and then the year 3 and 4, the out years, being about half of that.
And I realize that council probably doesn't have a whole lot of latitude as to whether to approve this or not, given that it was a result of the negotiations. But it does kind of raise the question for me, a desire that I have, and I would imagine other councilors have, is to have a better sense, a little bit better sense of where we're going with the entire implementation of the agreement, and what the game plan is on that. And I think we've had some requests for that, some of that information. We don't have it all yet. I realize this is a time-sensitive approval, but and then we're also being asked, of course, to extend the contract for Mr. Greenwood and other expenses. Of course, it'll be part of the budget discussions. But I hope that the approval of this and of Mr. Greenwood's fees will be an opportunity for us to really kind of, between the council and administration, really get a real strong understanding of where we're heading with this and where we've come in the past year, for instance, since we had promotions to the higher level each of these things has to do with budget matters and where the buck stops when it comes to budget. But I think when we talk about the budget, especially things as critical as this DOJ agreement, very important that the city council understand where we're heading with all that implementation across the board, whether it's how we use our attorney, our on-call attorney from Mr. Greenwood, to how we're handling it within the department. So.
Mr. President, Council Bennett, I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. I think it might be educational and informative for perhaps Mr. Greenwood and Dr. Ginger. I don't know if we want to do it as a study session or whatnot, but to do a layout and framework of what, I use the term implementation, what implementation is, the temporal timelines of what implementation is, at what point it goes from implementation to full-blown execution and auditing, and of course the reports that are due every, I want to say, 4 months during the first 2 years of the settlement agreement. But I think you're entitled to that, and I think it would be helpful to be able to make policy decisions, understanding, what the horizon looks like here for the next 4 years, basically, of this agreement, the responsibilities, and then practically how they'll be conducted, what the department will be expected to do, and expectancies, and ultimately how they'll be judged, whether they're reaching those objectives and targets.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're going to be shelling out a lot of millions here in the next few years for these issues, and I do think probably a study session might be a good venue for such a thing. It's still a public meeting, but it's not quite as, I think there's more just latitude for back and forth discussion in a study session than in front of the full council, but I'll leave that up to the other councilors to discuss and decide. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Bennett. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with what Councilor Bennett has just said, and I feel that it's important that we allow the public to also know, because we are looking at a phase-in of 4 years, and it looks like we're 12 phases and 4 years. And listening to the public this evening, they don't have any faith in the process. And they have said that the DOJ has failed them, although this process is just in the beginning phases. But I definitely support a study session to, let the public also know that these are the things that are going to be done and how they're going to be phased in. It's important that we are as transparent as we possibly can be, because we are expending $4.5 million of the taxpayers' money annually to pay for these, pay for the settlement agreement. And again, I think it's important and it's paramount that the public is involved in the process and they understand what we are doing every step of the way.
Thank you, Councilor Sanchez. Councilor Gibson, Councilor Lewis, and Councilor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is about the fact that this is a 4-year contract with Mr. Ginger. And the last time I talked with anyone at APD, it's been some time ago, but the reporting out was that we were 60% completed. 60% the way through the settlement agreement, reaching the settlement agreement. And that, like I say, that was some time ago, well over a month ago. So, and I understand that after 2 years, we have an opportunity to evaluate, see where we are, and possibly at that time, cut this 4-year process in half, stop it at the 2 years, and then we'd be out from the supervision of the DOJ. And I'm optimistic, not about very many things, but about this I'm optimistic that we can get through this in 2 years. If that's the case, then would we still need the services of the monitor? I have trouble seeing how we would need them, and if not, then would we still be on the hook for payments in the years 3 and 4.
Mr. President, Councilor Gibson, to begin with, I appreciate your optimism. I truly do. I think that's probably what we need. And it's going to be a high climb. And what I mean by that is that really most of these agreements that have been put in place in other jurisdictions have had much longer time frames associated with them. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the biggest reasons is a lack of togetherness between the plaintiffs, the Department of Justice, and the defendants, the local government. From the get-go, we have had a pretty cooperative spirit and have looked collegially at trying to get this done. And we've gotten a head start, a jump on it, as you pointed out. But the 2-year period is really a determination of what's called substantial compliance. And these types of settlement agreements, when I did Durant consent decree at the prison system that had been in place for 20 years, we did the same thing. We said, we need to know where the goalposts are, and is it that we have to kick the ball through it from the 30-yard line 9 out of 10 times? Because if that's what it is, let us know where substantial compliance is. And this particular agreement has specificity and detail as it relates to the determinations, criteria of substantial compliance. Once you get to substantial compliance, you want sustainability, because other jurisdictions have had trouble with backsliding. Mayors change, councils change, police chiefs change, and the like. And so you want it hard baked into your department, to use an unartful term. But what you try to do is go to self-monitoring. And then at that point, the department itself is responsible for having the systems and the infrastructure in place to continue on to self-monitoring, and ultimately at the end of 4 years, because we'll be producing a lot more of the work product ourselves in that self-monitoring period, the monitor will check the veracity, credibility, accuracy of the self-monitoring product to ensure that it's maintaining substantial compliance, and ultimately the settlement agreement would be dismissed after 4 years if we reach that point of substantial compliance followed by sufficient self-monitoring. And I know that's a long version. I apologize for boring us with the legal detail, but that's kind of what it looks like.
If I may put that in the Reader's Digest version, we shouldn't hang our hats on 2 years.
2 plus 2, Reader's
Right.
Digest.
Right.
Best case scenario.
Okay, one last
Yes,
thing,
ma'am.
the lack of gross receipts tax within the, this agreement and how that's going to be handled.
Mr. President, Councilor Gibson, I was just kind of notified today, late in the day, that that was an open issue still. And I don't know if there's an exemption of any sorts for federal vendors, because this is technically the federal court that the monitor is assigned to. And I think the attorneys are going to look at the tax implications. I couldn't really find one way or the other on that.
Thank you.
Councilor Whitaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Perry, can you talk about the process? Was anybody else looked at, and why Dr. Ginger was the one that was chosen as the monitor?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I appreciate that, Mr. President, Councilor Winter. In the agreement itself, it contemplated that the parties to the agreement, the DOJ and the city, would put out an RFP. And so there actually was a competitive RFP put out on the streets. We had to fast track it. I forget how long it was out there for. I want to say 30, 45 days. And really, when you look at the folks that do this kind of work, they'll either put together a team, which we had as far as some submissions, or there's folks that have done it before, or there's folks that have done it before and then kind of change the team to try to tailor it towards the needs of that particular proposal, request for proposal. And when we put out an RFP, we had, I want to say probably about 10 people respond to the RFP that went to DOJ and went to Mr. Greenwood on behalf of the city. And really, they culled it down to about 5 or 6 that came in over a 3-day period and were given the opportunity to present their proposals and stand for questions by both the DOJ and the city of Albuquerque. And I participated in that RFP screening. It came down to picking several finalists, and Dr. Ginger was a consensus agreement that because of the multitude of experience that he had in Pittsburgh, with the New Jersey State Police, and some other work he had done, additionally, his approach that he thought he could get this done in about a 4-year period, whereas some of us have told us, we don't think that that's doable. We worked in LA, that was 10 years. So his can-do attitude and the fact that he's been able to do that in other jurisdictions, had the right people on his team, and his own personal expertise in the management and data compilations that were necessary. I mean, he's a criminal justice professor and a researcher. And I think when you talk about the folks that do this, you get lawyers, they'll give you a lot of legal opinions of whether you're hitting those goalposts, as I pointed out. You'll get police folks that are former chiefs of police talking about whether they think you hit it. He said, look, I'm a referee. I call balls and strikes, and I know how to do that statistically. And I think that we were both impressed, the DOJ and the city, that that's what we want, is a fair-minded arbiter referee to look at what we're doing and to provide expertise on whether we're hitting the mark and bringing about the necessary systems improvements. Thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Mr. President, just a budget consideration. It doesn't look like we really proposed a sufficient amount of money in FY16 budget. I wonder if we've taken that into consideration. I think we proposed that at 1.39 million in FY16, and this agreement calls for 1.463, almost 1.64 million. So what are the, I guess, the thoughts regarding that as far as proposals in this budget, as well as any provisions for GRT, because these are recurring funds. So any provisions for GRT situations there? I guess, Mr. Chair.
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, I'll have to look at that. I guess you're referring specifically to the line item involving Dr. Ginger, because the overall DOJ proposal was closer to, I think, about 4.6.
And this is just for FY16, it was proposing FY16 budget. And the number of 1.463, I guess, would be specifically for Dr. Ginger.
That's correct. And I can look at that and drill down on it a little bit. If you'd indulge me and give me the opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just, my question is when would the contract start? Because this is the independent monitor, and based on the district court approving our settlement agreement, we would need the independent monitor from what my understanding is, and since that hasn't happened, when would it start?
Mr. President, Councilor Pena, the independent monitor already has started to do some work. And this is really a stipulation, and it's a court order, a court agreed to stipulation. It goes into the court record and basically provides the long-term commitment of appropriation. Of course, it would be subject to annual appropriation. It's a contract itself, but in every year, it would have to be funded. But that's a little bit about what the commitment had to involve, because it's a situation where if you're asking someone to come in and commit to a 4-year period of work, there has to be some reasonable assurance of commitment to it, and that's what this does. Dr. Ginger has been here, I think, twice so far, and I know he's been dealing with the DOJ and the police department over the phone, having conference calls as well, trying to get that data infrastructure put in place, as well as some important policy development. Because as you pointed out, we're on the clock, and I think that's what you're referring to. The settlement was agreed to, better part of 3 months ago, and we're on the clock. And so he's kind of extended himself somewhat, I guess.
Thank you, Councilor Pena. I have a couple of questions that no one else does. And primarily, in the long run, some of the questions that have been asked, but I have a more, I guess, direct way of looking at this. It talks about 12 phases, and you mentioned that the first 2 years would be kind of the front-loaded year, if you will, and then it would diminish as the third and fourth year come forward. But you weren't ready to say that the third and fourth year would evaporate, become even less than the 7.7 million. What makes you think that, and why wouldn't we want to hang our hat on
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. President. It's the budget that was submitted by Dr. Ginger, and I don't think it evaporates, but I think it does decrease. That budget was submitted by Dr. Ginger. It contemplates the first 2 years of being in a situation where there's an ongoing evaluation, program development every 4 months, basically. And then at the end of 2 years, a determination of substantial compliance and a transition to the model of self-auditing. If we're there, there are conceivable situations that could develop, and I can't tell you that there isn't. Whereas if we don't get there, it could involve additional time, energy, and materials, basically, for Dr. Ginger. But I think conceptually and practically, a lot of the policy development should be done within the first couple of years. When you look at the important use of force policies, lapel camera, training models, auditing of the training, use of force itself as far as the review processes that are in place, and virtually every other area of the agreement. I think it can be developed and implemented in the, probably, and tested basically in those first 2 years. Tested over a period of time, not one time tested, but tested every 4 months. So there's a sufficient linear period to look at to evaluate the effectiveness of it. And theoretically contemplates doing that for 2 years and then moving towards the out years.
Thank you. Now, I do also want to ask about, and I'm looking around and I don't see Dr. Ginger here. Is he not present?
No, sir. I
Which
think
is,
we would have had to pay for that. I know we came up. So we tried to be somewhat judicious. I don't mean to be cute, but
but that was cute. Yeah, I don't want to pay him any more than we have to. But I do worry that we're paying for sometimes something that he's not able to do, and that's what I was going to ask him if he had been here. In one of the meetings that we had, he was not totally familiar with the ordinance, which I would think would be the first thing I would read if I was charging over $4 million. And so, and also did realize some of the nuances of the contract that I thought he had submitted. So those would be the questions that I would have asked him prior to voting for this. And first opportunity I have, I will ask those questions.
Yes, sir.
But at this point, let me go to other councilors that have some questions also. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I had the same concerns that you had. I sat in on that same meeting, and I was very frustrated that Dr. Ginger didn't really understand the POB board ordinance that this council passed unanimously, and that was part of the settlement agreement. I mean, who is going to monitor the monitor? Do we go to this council, the administration? I think that we need to watch very carefully the expenditures that are being made by this monitor, and at the same time, like Councilor Gardenia stated, I had the same concerns when he told us that he had not read, and he would get back with us the next day. I've not heard from him. I'm not sure if you've heard from him, Councilor Gardenia.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, I appreciate that question too. The short version is who monitors the monitor is the federal court. Basically, it's a district court judge. He's basically an officer of the court, and it's an Article 3 appointment, basically pursuant to the Constitution. So there's a pretty high degree of legal authority for that type of monitoring of the monitor. As it relates to that specific interchange and request for information, I remembered I was present, and that was his first day in Albuquerque, basically. He came out and he introduced himself to a number of different interest groups and internal, external community and the like. And I remember he came to council with some of his staff. I think that was the meeting that we're probably referring to. And there's 344 paragraphs to that settlement agreement, and specifically as it relates to the BOP ordinance, I think, you know, it takes a little bit of digestion to understand that, and I know that he is intimately familiar with it now because he has opined on some of the detail in it and some of the issues that he felt basically have been initially unworkable, and a timing aspect of requiring the training for the board members before hearing the cases and the like. So I think that his engagement into that issue in and of itself is evidence of his overall understanding of the importance of civilian oversight. At least it's a step in the right direction. I mean, if you didn't see that, I'd obviously be concerned.
And I noticed, or I heard you clearly say that you didn't need to be cute, and I don't need to be cute either, but the chance of his not digesting what he was going to be working on and from gives me indigestion. But we have all of these concerns, right? And it would have been nice to have him here. I think it would have been worth another, I don't know, whatever it is, $130, $720, for him to be here and to at least defend what some of these tacit accusations are about his not having read the ordinance or whatever else we think, at least I do, and that he would have had the opportunity to answer those questions.
Yes, sir.
But since he didn't, those questions will be unanswered, and unfortunately, it will sound like he did not give those concerns much thought. Councilor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm really not comfortable with this, given the last meeting that I didn't attend, but I heard about it, and his lack of knowledge, and that this contract is for 4 years. I'm not comfortable with this, particularly since we can't speak with him, and have had very, very limited contact with him. I've only met the man once. I saw him at a meeting and then here before the meeting that evening. I would feel much better about either only doing a 1-year contract or maximum a 2-year contract with the option for renewal. And I know we don't like that, but it's, you know, 4.5 million and change is an awfully big commitment for us to make, and since he hasn't done, at least in that recent meeting, hasn't really come prepared. I'm not comfortable with this at all. Is it possible to defer this?
Let's continue the discussion for a second, if you don't mind. Councilor Gibson, Councilor Harris has a thought, but I'd like to come back to your concern.
Sure, and thank you, Mr. President, and Dr. Ginger, and is he in town full-time?
Mr. President, Councilor Harris, no, sir. He doesn't live in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
How long has he been here?
He has been here probably twice, I believe, since his name was submitted to the federal court and has been since approved by the federal court. I don't think it's going to be a situation where he's going to be here, you know, every couple of weeks. A lot of the work is being done on conference calls. A lot of his staff are spread out into different parts of the country. And that's not uncommon to all of the responders to this particular proposal. It's a team. The expertise of that team includes people with mental health expertise, policing expertise, training expertise, legal expertise, and those folks kind of work in they don't work for the corporate headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. They work in different parts around the country. And it was always contemplated, and most of the other proposals, models include teams that were similar as well. And so, those types of logistics need to be worked out. And just to point out, it's a situation that was approved, his appointment was approved by the federal court.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, Mr. President, so you said it's not gonna be every couple of weeks, is that?
That's correct, yes, sir.
So about how often do you think he'll be here?
And Dr. Ginger himself, probably once a month for, a week. I think that's the most intense part of it. That's probably what we're looking at.
So maybe it'll be okay to schedule him to come back. Chat
Well,
with us.
no, absolutely. And I think as we talked about earlier, with Councilor Benton, I think it's good to have him come and do a study session to give you the background. But it's important to recognize that we are defendants in a lawsuit. And the lawsuit settlement agreement was submitted to the court with the signatures of the City of Albuquerque and the Department of Justice. And as far as our obligations on the timelines of that, we need to get him, working in earnest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Goodson, if you don't, Councilor Goodson, if you don't mind, I'd like to go to Councilor Penny. Councilor Penny.
So this kind of goes back to my question, so can the district court change the agreement?
They have not approved the agreement
Right.
yet. They've approved the appointment of Dr. Ginger as the monitor. But, this contemplates payment periodically, I think in 12-month increments. Basically, from what I understand, the initial proposal was to have to make a single payment to Dr. Ginger of the $1.6 million, and that'll be for an annual payment. This isn't a traditional arrangement. It's a stipulation in federal court regarding basically a special master.
So, Mr. President, so who made the appointment, who recommended the appointment? And then you said in federal court,
Yeah, the Department of Justice and the City of Albuquerque.
the city of Albuquerque, so the mayor's office.
Well, I think Mr. Ginger came down, and Mr. Greenwood had talked to council about that and explained, how it was we made that selection and the qualifications of Mr. Ginger.
Okay, so we're, Mr. President, so we're paying an independent monitor to monitor the DOJ agreement, but the DOJ agreement hasn't been finalized through the district court. And so my question is can the district court change the agreement so that he's already monitoring something that he may have to be monitoring something different?
The district court, has plenary authority in this matter and can accept or reject or propose changes to the agreement. If the parties didn't agree with it, they could say, well, let's blow the agreement up and proceed to trial. I mean, there's a whole host of different options that are available with the agreement not having been approved by the federal court as of yet. That would be within the discretion of the judge.
So Mr. Barrett, you see where my confusion is that we're paying a monitor already to monitor an agreement that we don't have finalized?
We have, the agreement in and of itself has been submitted out for amicus response, and there was 25 amicus responses. I think the court is being judicious and thoughtful in allowing folks to give their opinion as to various aspects of the agreement through the amicus process. What the district court has not done is allow parties to come into the lawsuit as what are called interveners, meaning that they would be actual parties to the lawsuit, with the exception of the Albuquerque Police Officers Association. So I think the district court is trying to give the community a voice and and a vehicle to be heard on those issues. But I think that based on some of the comments of the court praising the agreement, it's highly likely that the agreement, you know, I don't want to speak for the federal court, but some of the indicia, in my opinion, that I've seen through the course of the settlement presentation has indicated that the court is satisfied with the core components of the agreement principle.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Sanchez.
Yeah, Mr. President, I guess just a suggestion, I'd like to throw this out as a suggestion, maybe the city attorney, the administration could we make a request of the judge? Possibly, I wonder if there's any other way we can restructure this, and maybe a request of the judge to do a 2-year contract with a 2-year option, possibly. Because it does, the way this does sound, it sounds like someone who's getting a 4-year term, you know, like to do a 4-year term without a whole lot of, you know, accountability along the way, I guess, in a sense. And maybe there would be a lot of accountability, but it certainly doesn't appear like there would be, not in this sense when it comes to, you know, financially. And so I would make that suggestion, and I guess see what you all would think of something like that. Is there another way to restructure this contract as an option in a way that would make it a little bit more accountable?
I know that Mr. Greenwood and the Department of Justice had discussions with the federal court as it relates to the structuring term of the agreement and payment frequencies. And so I don't want to say, you know, there's always a way. And I think really what we'd have to do is probably have Mr. Greenwood, the city's attorney, and the Department of Justice probably schedule something with the various you know, APOA who's a party now, and we can go to a little status conference over there in the judge's chambers. So we can probably take somebody that's the FIGO chairperson and the president of the city council, or anyone you designate, and you could go talk with the judge and see if that's possible. I can't tell you what the judge would do. I can tell you that the attorneys, you know, Mr. Greenwood has tried to work this out with the court to try to make a commitment. And I understand what you're saying about 2 years. It's your prerogative. The only
I'm asking. I don't know if it was for the wishes of the rest of the council, but I would make that request. I would make that, and if it includes, you know, the chair of finance, council president, whoever, and I think that it's a fine suggestion. I would just make a request. The council, certainly Mr. Perry, if we can make that happen, and if it's not something that the rest of the council will disagree with, I think that would be a wise choice.
Sure, I can do that. So if you'd like to defer it, we could defer it. I think that there's certain risk involved in doing that, but I don't want to be the person to put anybody under pressure on this thing. If there's any sort of concerns by the federal court with the timeliness or other considerations, that's something that needs to be done right, not fast. I think that's your concern, and I get that fully, so we can do that.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will move for a 2-week deferral. The answer is always no if we don't ask.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's important that we, 2 weeks should not make a big difference. And this is a $1.6 million contract for Mr. Ginger. I mean, he should have been here this evening to answer questions to this council, but he's not. And I would hope that in 2 weeks, if we're back here again, we've already met with the court, so we can have him here with his $1.6 million contract as part of that contract to answer questions to the council, because I don't think we received adequate answers this evening. Mr. Perry?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Sanchez. I do have Councilor Benton next. Did you want to say anything? And we do have a deferral on the dais. However, Councilor Harris, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll second that. We might need to defer it again if Dr. Ginger can't be here in 2 weeks, but something also occurred to me. Now, when we confirmed Ms. Hernandez, does she become city attorney as of right now?
Yes.
I think so.
2 hours ago.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna ask her any questions right now, but I guess she's city attorney as of right now, so that might be something that we need to get her on board on this quickly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I do second that motion for deferral.
We do have a motion on the dais that you for deferral. Did you need to have something?
Just a short little comment. I mean, if he's coming to try to get for a contract, it seems like he should come on his own dime in order to. I don't see how we could pay him to come down to have a discussion with us so that we can get a contract for him.
Councilor Harris, I don't know if we're gonna get through.
I'll let Mr. Perry and maybe Mr. Hernandez talk about that, but if we do have a court order saying that he's appointed, I think that might be an exception for that concern. So anyway, I think that's an interesting issue, but I think you guys should get that.
We do have a deferral on the dais, but Councilman, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Perry, I've got it, sir. I mean, you've worked with the DOJ more than any of us here, and I think you seem like a little concerned about us delaying that. And if that's true, because you've worked with the feds, and we haven't. So if you do have a concern, let us know. Is there a possibility that we do pass it, but we still talk about that 2-year commitment with the judge?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, I do have concerns, but I also respect the concerns that you all have, and I don't think that they're unreasonable. I think at the end of the day, we're a little bit under the gun. And what I mean by that is that, we tendered this settlement agreement, and it's our responsibility to pay for the monitor. And we thought that this was a fairly reasonable period of time, and that the payment frequency is reasonable as well. I think the court would be open to discussing this with elected officials and hearing out the concerns of perhaps, the elected officials as representatives of the body. At the end of the day, I think that we have a responsibility to pay for a monitor on a long-term basis. And the judge is very diplomatic and very eloquent and very convincing as far as meeting those obligations. And I think that's probably what we're going to find, with an emphasis on the last term, convincing.
Yeah, I guess we haven't been. Well, I think we're convinced that we're gonna defer this, so we have a deferral in a second.
Councilor Attorney walked up.
I'm sorry to
yes.
see Jonathan back there.
Sorry, Mr. President, councilors, I don't want to unnecessarily delay the discussion, but if it would help any of you to know that in the stipulation, it states that the city is not responsible for paying any expenses beyond the court-appointed duration of the monitor's appointment. And so if 2 years from now, we convince the federal court that the monitor services are no longer needed and the court ends those payments also end for years 3 and 4. So I would leave it the rest of Mr. Perry.
That's a good opinion, however, it does contractually tie us to 4 years.
Mr. President, it really lasts until the court releases him.
So that could be next week?
Could be.
Great.
I wouldn't
Let's go
count
for
those
that.
2 days.
Okay, we do have a deferral on the last, in a second. Those in favor of deferring this for, was it 2 weeks? I'm sorry. For 2 weeks, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no.
No.
No. That passes on the 7-2 vote. Okay, we're now on E. Councilor Benton, you have the next 5.